In the darkness beneath the moss-draped oaks, a small shape stirred. It was no animal, but an 8-year-old boy, Elias. His body trembled like a beating heart. The air was thick with humidity, and in the distance, the croaking of frogs drifted across the rice fields. Elias's eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness, and he counted the few stars that had not been dimmed by the light streaming from the windows of the plantation owner's house, Mr. Henry Whitmore. In his hand, he clutched something. A small sack, sewn from coarse cloth. He pressed it against his chest, as if it held a rare treasure. Beyond the cluster of trees, past the thick undergrowth, lay an old, crooked path that led to the Wakama River. This path was forbidden to slaves, for it led to the dock where the master kept his boat for trips to the town. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked back over his shoulder. Among the slave cabins beyond the fields, there was no movement. All was silent. But he knew that silence was a deception. Danger lurked everywhere. Overseer Corbin's cat-like eyes could be anywhere. And where were his hunting dogs sleeping at this hour, dogs that waited only for a command? Suddenly, from a distance, a dog barked. Not a sharp yelp, but a low, prolonged bay, as if someone had just roused it from sleep. Elias's heart stopped. He froze. He closed his eyes and prayed inwardly, the prayer his mother, Priscilla, had taught him. But he forgot the words. He only remembered his mother's face. Then another sound. The crunch of human footsteps. Heavy and slow. Someone was coming. Elias slipped into the bushes and hid himself. Thorns pricked his skin, but he felt no pain. He only thought, why are they looking for me? I have nothing. But he did have something. He had the sack. And in that sack was his identity, his past, and perhaps the judgment of his fate. It was 10 years earlier. A scorching afternoon in the summer of 1836. In the flooded rice fields of Rice Hope, where water stood stagnant, breeding snakes and leeches, Priscilla gave birth to Elias on the edge of a small hut. Pain racked her back, and she longed for someone to give her a sip of water, but at that hour, all the slaves were working in the fields. Only a 9-year-old girl, Sarah, too sick to work, held Priscilla's hand and helped her through the birth. Elias's first sound was not a cry, but a soft murmur, as if he understood as soon as he entered the world that making noise here was not advisable. Priscilla held him to her breast, and tears filled her eyes. They were not tears of joy, but of fear and sorrow. She knew what her child's life would be. Elias's cabin had only one room. A dirt floor, a thatched roof, and cracks in the walls where the winter wind would seep through. His father, Jeremiah, was a strong man who cut more rice than anyone else on the plantation. But he was silent, just like his son would become. When he returned from work in the evening, he would take Elias on his lap, sit under the oak tree, and teach him the sounds of the birds. He would say, "Listen, son. That's a cardinal. That's a blue jay. They are like us, speaking their own language." The first great sorrow of Elias's life came when he was only 2 years old. One morning, before sunrise, the sound of horses' hoofs was heard. Master Whitmore's son, young Master Thomas, was riding, accompanied by a stranger. Mr. Whitmore himself came as well. They stood before the line of slaves, looking to see who was strong, who was weak. Their gaze fell upon Jeremiah. Mr. Whitmore pointed his riding crop at Jeremiah and said, "This one." Priscilla screamed. She clung to Jeremiah's neck. But Overseer Corbin pulled her away by force. Jeremiah looked at Priscilla and said with his eyes, "Be still. Be quiet. For the child's sake." Elias watched his father being bound in chains. He watched him stand in a long line with other slaves. Then they all left with the stranger, seated in a cart that kicked up dust. Elias did not understand why his father was not coming back. He sat by the door all night, counting the stars, just as his father had taught him. Priscilla turned to stone. She even stopped crying. She only worked, fed her child, and slept. She loved Elias deeply, but her love was now wrapped in silence, like a precious thing that was dangerous to reveal. When Elias turned 5, he was put to work. He was not yet strong enough for the fields, so he was sent to the chicken coop. His job was to scatter grain for the hens, collect eggs, and fill the large pots with water. The work was not hard, but it was tedious. Elias's world had now expanded. He met the other children of the plantation, old Tobias, who was lame and worked repairing things around the plantation, Nairobi, a young girl skilled in sewing clothes, and Caesar, a boy a little older than Elias who looked after the horses. Caesar became Elias's first friend. Together they would hunt for lizards and make clay pots by the riverbank. But Elias was different from the other children. He remained very quiet and spent most of his time thinking. One day, while counting the chicken eggs, he realized he could count them. 5, 10, 15. He could count up to 20. No one had taught him, but he could do it. He told this secret only to his mother. Priscilla was astonished. It was against the law to teach slaves to read, write, or count. No one could do it without the plantation owner's permission. But Priscilla looked at her son and saw the spark in his eyes. That spark was dangerous, but also beautiful. Priscilla gave Elias an old, torn sack. She said, "Son, whatever you learn, remember it. But never tell anyone. This sack is yours. Whatever you find precious, keep it in here." The first thing Elias placed in the sack was a red feather from a cardinal bird. It reminded him of his father. As Elias grew older, he was given new tasks. Now he began to help around the big house. He chopped wood, carried water, and cleaned dishes in the kitchen. The big house was a strange world. There were clean clothes, glass windows, and shining silverware laid out on the dining table. Mrs. Whitmore, the master's wife, was a thin, sickly woman who rarely left her room. Mr. Henry Whitmore was not a cruel man, at least not outwardly. He was quiet by nature, always lost in thought. He would order newspapers from Charleston and sit in his study reading them in the evening. He would sometimes even speak to the slaves, but there was always a distance in his words, as if they belonged to a different species. But Mr. Whitmore's son, Master Thomas, was entirely different. He was not quiet like his father. He was loud, rode his horses hard, and shouted and yelled at the slaves. He was around 20 years old and eager to take over his father's business. He would often join Overseer Corbin in inflicting harsh punishments on the slaves. Corbin himself was a strange man. He spoke little, but his presence spread fear. He always carried a long whip with a lead weight tied to its tip. One day, Elias was sweeping the yard of the big house when Master Thomas spotted him. Thomas called out, "Hey, boy. Come here." Elias's heart pounded. He approached slowly. Thomas held a small book in his hand. He opened it and showed Elias a picture. The picture showed a white man on horseback, with black people bowed down to the ground before him. Thomas said, "Look at this, boy. This is your place. Understand?" Elias nodded. He understood, but there was no fear in his eyes. Only curiosity. Thomas did not like that. He closed the book, leaned towards Elias, and said, "Your eyes see too much, boy. Learn to keep them closed, or one day someone will teach you how." That day, Elias learned to keep his eyes closed. But he kept on seeing. Elias's silence became his greatest weapon. He listened, he watched, and he remembered. He saw how the slaves communicated without speaking. During work, they would sing soft songs, songs that carried hidden messages. Those songs were their language, their history, their pain. Old Tobias, the lame man, played a strange instrument. He had made it himself, an old box with strings stretched across it. He called it a banjo. When work was done at night, the slaves would gather around Tobias, and he would play. The tunes were strange, sometimes joyful, sometimes mournful. Elias loved those tunes. He would sit beside Tobias for hours, just listening. One day, he asked Tobias, "How do you play all this?" Tobias smiled and said, "It's the voice of my heart, son. When you cannot speak, this instrument becomes your tongue." From that day on, Elias became Tobias's student. He taught him how to pluck the strings, and Elias learned with great dedication. He knew this was not just music, but a secret language, a language white folks could not understand. Elias learned much from Tobias. He learned how the rice crop grew, how to tell when rain was coming, and which plants were useful for sickness. Tobias taught him about wild herbs that could ease pain and heal wounds. This knowledge, too, was dangerous, because it was their own medicine, not the master's. The year was 1844. The monsoon rains that year were fierce. The Wakama River swelled and flooded, reaching the plantation fields. The rice paddies were submerged. Slaves had to work day and night to keep the water away from the big house. Mr. Whitmore was worried. The crop was being destroyed. One night, during a torrential downpour, Mr. Corbin sent several slaves to reinforce the river embankment. Elias was among them, even though he was still small. They carried sacks of earth and piled them onto the levee. It was dark, and the water was rising rapidly. Suddenly, the embankment broke. A powerful rush of water came, sweeping several slaves away. Elias saw old Tobias, who was lame and could not run fast, fall into the water. Without thinking, Elias grabbed Tobias's hand. He was small, but strong. He dragged Tobias to the shore. Tobias survived, but he was greatly weakened. The next day, Mr. Corbin found out who had saved Tobias. He called Elias and said, "You are brave, boy. But bravery is not good for slaves. Brave slaves die young." It was not a threat, but a statement of fact. Elias understood. After the flood, Tobias's health declined. He developed a cough and grew weaker by the day. Mr. Whitmore sent for a doctor, but the doctor said the old slave was no longer fit for work. Mr. Corbin suggested that Tobias be cast out, but Mr. Whitmore refused. He allowed Tobias to remain in his cabin until he died. Tobias was unconscious for many days before his death. One night, as Elias sat beside him, Tobias's eyes opened. He looked at Elias and whispered, "My banjo, son. It is yours. There is a secret in it." Elias asked, "What secret?" Tobias closed his eyes. He said, "Beneath the strings. Hollow. For you." By morning, Tobias was dead. He was buried at the edge of the plantation, in an unmarked grave. No one prayed, no one wept, at least not outwardly. Elias went to Tobias's cabin and brought back the banjo. It was old and battered, but to Elias, it was priceless. He examined it carefully. Beneath the strings, in the wood, there was a small mark. He pried it open with a knife, and inside, he found an old piece of paper. There was writing on it. Elias could not read, but he recognized the markings. It was a map. A map of the river, of the forest, and a place marked with an X. Beside the X, it said, "Freedom." Elias hid the map. He knew what it was. It was a route north. It showed the places where slaves could run to reach the free states. Where had old Tobias gotten this map? Had he himself planned to escape? These questions swirled in Elias's mind. He would stay awake at night, looking at the map and memorizing it. He committed every mark, every turn, every tree to memory. But he was still small. He could not run alone. He had to wait. But his mother, Priscilla, was changing. She had grown even more silent, and her eyes held a strange gleam. One night, she woke Elias and said, "Son, I had a dream. In the dream, your father was there. He said the time has come." Elias asked, "Time for what?" Priscilla replied, "Time to go. Staying here, we will die. You must go." Elias thought of the map. But he could not leave his mother. He said, "I will not leave you." Priscilla held her son to her chest and said, "You will go for me. You are my freedom." But fate had other plans. One day, a new slave woman arrived at the plantation. Her name was Delphinia, and she was very beautiful. She caught Mr. Corbin's eye. Mr. Corbin summoned her to him, and within a few days, Delphinia began working in the big house. Delphinia was friendly towards Elias. She would talk to him, ask him about himself. She would ask where he went alone at night, what he did. Elias remained silent, but Delphinia would press him to tell her. She would say, "You can trust me, I am like you." One night, Elias made a mistake. He told Delphinia about the map. He said, "I have a map that shows the way to freedom." Delphinia's eyes widened. She said, "Really? Where is it?" But the next morning, Mr. Corbin came to Elias's cabin. He searched the cabin and found the banjo. He broke it open and took out the map. Then he looked at Elias. There was no anger in his eyes, only satisfaction. He said, "I knew there was something in you, boy. Always so quiet." Elias understood. Delphinia had betrayed him. Perhaps Mr. Corbin had told her to do it, or perhaps she had done it willingly. What difference did it make? The punishment was severe. Elias was tied to a post in front of the big house and whipped. Mr. Corbin wielded the whip himself. 1, 2, 10, 20. Elias did not cry out. He only gritted his teeth and remembered his mother's face. When the whipping was over, his back was torn and bleeding. Then he was locked in the barn. For 3 days, he received only water, no food. In the darkness, he lay there and counted the stars, which were not there. When Elias emerged from the barn, he was changed. His silence had grown deeper. He trusted no one now. He worked, he ate, and he slept. But at night, he would wake and look towards the river. He remembered the map. He remembered the way. Priscilla was worried about her son's condition. She knew he could break. One night, she came to him and took out a small locket from around her neck. It was made of wood, carved with some symbol. Priscilla said, "This was your father's. It was given to him by his mother, and to her by her mother. This is your lineage, son. Remember, you are no one's slave. You are the son of a free man." Elias took the locket in his hand. It was warm. He felt as if his father's spirit had entered him. Priscilla said, "Now you must go. The map is gone, but the path is in your mind. Do not stop me, or I will die." It was one of the last nights of autumn in 1846. The moon was very bright, but clouds had gathered, making the darkness deep. Elias had made his decision. He would run tonight. He gathered only what was necessary, a gourd of water, 2 pieces of cornbread, and the small sack his mother had given him. The sack still held the red feather, and now it also held his father's locket. He stepped out of the cabin. Priscilla stood in the doorway. She embraced her son, but said nothing. She only looked at him, as if memorizing his face. Then she gestured with her eyes, "Go." Elias disappeared into the darkness. He knew where to go. He moved through the undergrowth, reached the old oak tree, and from there headed towards the river. Suddenly, dogs began to bark. Mr. Corbin had found out. Elias started to run. He reached the riverbank. There was an old, rotted boat, but it was unusable. He could jump into the river, but there were alligators. The dogs were getting closer. Elias looked back. He could see the glow of torches among the trees. He was trapped. Then he heard a sound. It was not a human sound, but the lapping of water. Yet he felt as if someone was calling him. He took his mother's gift, the locket, in his hand and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw, behind a thicket he had never explored before, a small path. It was a path he had never seen on the map. Was this the path Tobias had hidden? Or was it something else? He began to run. The path led him to an old, dilapidated building deep in the forest. It had once been slave quarters, but now stood abandoned. Elias peered inside. It was dark. He slipped in. The dogs were very close now. They circled the building. Elias held his breath. Then a strange thing happened. The barking suddenly stopped. Elias looked outside. The torchlight was receding. The dogs were silent. What had happened? Had Mr. Corbin given up the search? or had something else distracted the dogs? Elias stayed in the building. He remained awake all night, clutching the locket, waiting for dawn. When morning came, Elias stepped out of the building. The forest was silent. He moved forward. He was without a map now, but he remembered the way. He kept moving north. He walked all day, slept under trees at night. He ate wild berries, drank from streams. Days passed. One day, he approached a small town. A white man was working in a field. Elias asked him for water. The man looked at him, then saw the whip marks on his back. He remained silent. He gave Elias water and also food. Then he said, "Where are you going?" Elias said, "North." The man nodded. He said, "Be careful. 2 miles from here, there is a river. Across it, you will find a Quaker family. They will help you." Elias thanked him and moved on. This was the last time anyone saw Elias. Years later, in 1865, when the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, some freed slaves returned to Rice Hope. They wanted to find the graves of their loved ones. Priscilla was still alive, but very old and weak. She still lived in the same cabin, which the soldiers had not burned. People would ask her, "Where is your son?" Priscilla would remain silent. She would only hold a small sack in her hand, a sack containing a red feather. Some say they saw an old black man in the forest, playing a banjo and talking to the birds. Some say he went to Canada. Some say he drowned in the river. But Priscilla knew. She would wake at night and look outside. Sometimes, she thought she saw a shadow under the distant oak tree. A silent shadow, as free as the birds. Elias's name was never recorded in any office. He has no grave, no marker. But whenever the wind blows through Rice Hope and stirs the branches of the oak trees, they say you can hear a faint sound, the sound of a banjo, still playing the tunes old Tobias taught. This sound reminds us that history is not made only by famous names. History is made by the millions of forgotten people who were free even in their silence, who lived and died with stars in their eyes. Elias was one of them. He was God's servant, whom no one knew.